So I'm here to talk about my build, Johnny 5. It's a kind of a combo of a bunch of different stuff. So it's got a bunch of Technic, like the frame and a bunch of the parts. It's got power functions, so those are motors. It's got MINDSTORMS, which is pretty new to me, but really fun to play around with. So that gives you programming, and you can take sensors, have input, and then have it do stuff with the motors as well. And then also I say it's got system. And so for those of you who aren't familiar, systems basically like regular pieces. So kind of the outside is cladded in that, so it looks nice and pretty. I'll do some quick introductions. And then I've got a bunch of pictures of kind of the process of building Johnny 5. And then I've got a video to show you. It should be pretty fun. It's got some clips from early on in the process throughout the build. And then we will do a MINDSTORMS tour, just a couple of the functions. I'll run it live for you. And then open up for questions. And I'll kind of walk around the mock with the camera, and you guys can ask what you want. All right, so introducing myself. I am originally from Plymouth, Massachusetts. I'm living in Seattle now for many years, but it's my hometown and America's hometown. You see a picture of the Mayflower there, and I don't know why, but I was just inspired to put a picture of turkey because it's like the best food you can possibly ever eat. And Plymouth is all about Thanksgiving, so something a little goofy about me. As you know, I don't have a Boston accent. I don't know why, it's kind of a miracle, so happy about that. So I want to do this kind of favorite as a kid and favorite as an adult because obviously things have changed so much. I mean, you can just look at these two sets next to each other. So as a kid, I built this castle. Well, actually, my grandmother would build this castle, and I would tear it apart in battles over and over again. So I love the set, and she probably thought it was the worst thing in the world. But as an adult, I'd say Ninjago City's got to be my favorite. I mean, there's so many good sets, especially recent times. They're coming out with so many amazing things. But I think just the process of building this was the most fun I've had in the set. For me, my favorite mock that I've built, let's say, is the Shan Chen Great Ship. It's basically a sailing ship from the books Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan. We did a big collaboration, some friends and I, and this was a build for that. So pretty cool. All right, so how was I inspired? Some of you might recognize this picture. This is Boone and Mark's Star Wars bot from the TV show Lego Masters. And I was watching this with my brother, and we were like, oh man, we have got to build robots. That would be so much fun. I had never done anything like that. All the robots in the show were super good. They all had all these different functions. I'm like, okay, I've got MINDSTORMS, I've got power function stuff. Let's see what we can do. So at that point, you kind of say, well, what do I want to build? I mean, there's so many different options, right? So I like to sketch stuff. I like to go out and find pictures of things. So I was inspired by this old set I had as a kid, a really cool looking robot from Spirey's line. I was also inspired by WALL-E. They've already got the set of that, so I wasn't going to copy that exactly, but maybe take some features. You can see I sort of drew some versions of those, like maybe I'd put the Spires robot on treads, or put the Johnny 5 robot from Short Circuit on top of the box from WALL-E. I don't know, I was just thinking of all sorts of stuff, but pretty fun to think of the different ideas. And other things you have to think about were like, well, what functions do I want it to do? I knew MINDSTORMS had 4 motors and 4 sensors, so that was the maximum I could do for program stuff. But I also had power functions, so I could remote control things like the tank drive and the arms. So yeah, just pretty fun to sketch it out and see what you get. So at a certain point, I settled on Johnny 5. And then at that point, I just get a whole bunch of pictures, because if you're doing something from a real source, it's just, you know, immeasurably helpful to have pictures of all different angles, sizes, just so you can see what you need to do. Part of my process, typically, of doing something real is kind of fun, where, you know, you can look at a picture and you can guess how different sizes are relative to each other of different pieces, but it's a lot easier if you just measure. So what I like to do is get a picture, and you have to start somewhere. So you have to pick a component and say, I know this is such and such size. So maybe in this case, what I did was I picked the head. I said, okay, I want it to be about the size of a Lego dish. And so that's about 2.5 inches, okay. So I put the picture in this program, CorelDRAW, and I grow it in such that particular piece is an even number of pixels that's easy to do math with. So 2.5 inches, 250 pixels. And then I just go ahead and measure all the other stuff and say, oh, okay, this is 1200 pixels, that's 12 inches, blah, blah, blah. So that's pretty fun. And it makes the job like so much easier than just eyeballing stuff. All right, so I have another build itself. So kind of getting started, I started at the bottom, made sense to me. I really wanted to try out the tracks. I hadn't done that before. I hadn't used these fancy new yellow gears before, so those were cool. And almost immediately, I made one of my first kind of whoops moments that I wish I had fixed originally. And so I made a different size wheel on the front than the gear in the back. And so that kind of tilted the whole build just a little bit, and made things a little wonky. It's fine, it worked, but that's a lesson learned that I would change in the future. You know, keep this all flat and level. Of course, there's tons of angles with the rest of the robots that may not have helped me later, but it'd be a good start. Let's see. So I wanted to do tank drive, so you can control each side independently, so there are just 2 extra large motors. And another thing that I think different builders will do this differently, and different builds you do it differently, but sometimes you want to build the frame all the way and just figure out all the guts, and then you start making it pretty. In this case, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I didn't know how it was going to look. I didn't know it was going to be good. So I started doing things like putting some of the decorations on early, just to get a sense of how it was coming together. All right, so just I'll walk you guys through a few more work in progress shots. Nothing too crazy here, but you can see the robot come together. I just kind of continued building up as I went. And so this was the first version of the torso. And I say first version because there's always multiple versions of many of these things. It never works quite right the first time. Here's the shoulder laser, which actually, that came out right the first time, so that was good. What's next? So here you can see I've got the second or maybe even the third version of the torso. And so one thing I was finding was as I added more weight and size to this thing, I've never really built Technic tall and heavy like this. And so things are getting a little saggy. So it helped a lot to build a new rigid core. But a lesson learned for next time is that I need to redo the base as well. So then it hooks in nice and securely at the bottom. So it's a little rickety because of some of the connections of even the strong part itself just doesn't do it. I also wanted to mention, if you noticed, I'm going to go back a couple slides here. Johnny 5 has this tail thing, and I'm sure the designers of the movie just put that on there to keep him up. So if he, instead of popping a wheelie and crashing onto his back, he's a really tall, skinny robot, so it's got a high center of gravity, so it needed something to keep it stable. So that provided the perfect place to put the gigantic MINDSTORMS box. I was like, yes, it's perfect. And at first, that was supposed to be really easy to open. And I'll talk about what happened with that later. So a couple other things, just like I said, kept building up. I had different connections at different points to transition direction. And some of those ended up not being quite as strong as I wanted, so that's too bad. So version 2 will fix all these things, I'm sure. Another thing to note is that the neck is a tough one because he's just got this like really spindly, skinny neck. And you know, in real life, you can put like steel rods and things that are super strong. But I'm dealing with, you know, the Technic available parts. So I may take another crack at this, but that's definitely a point of concern. That it's just to make it look like the robot from the movie, it's got to be pretty skinny. All right, moving on to the head. So a couple interesting things. I started off with the medium motor built into the head. And so the motor would move with the head as it rotated. And that was pretty convenient. It worked really well until it got heavy. And then that wasn't strong enough, so I changed that later. Another thing I wanted to do was build a couple things into the head. So I had to start sketching again. And that's something that happens sometimes. You have to go back and say, okay, well, how the heck am I going to do this part? I need to sketch this out, make it work. So for that, I wanted to build a color sensor so I could get some functionality. You could hold something up and he would do something based on the input of that color. And also I needed a motor here to give him the iconic waggling eyebrows. I'm doing on time here. Okay, not bad. Okay, so a few more things. As I mentioned, I had the MINDSTORMS box in the back here. That became a problem when the robot got heavier. You know, I got more weight on the head. I've finished up the arms, all that weight's just pushing down on this. And with kind of the weak connection I had up front, it started to lean on the cover of the battery box. So if I ever want to get in there, you have to hold up the whole robot, rip off this door, get into the MINDSTORMS, put it back, and then it's just a total disaster. But it looks cool. It looks like the piston's doing its job. So it works out. Another cool thing I noticed on a set I got a couple years ago, there's this Technic, tow truck. And they had a lot of wires on that too. And Lego did this neat thing where they labeled their wires with color. And I was like, oh, that's genius, because I've got this soup of wires on this thing. And it's like, how do you keep track of this stuff as you go? So I started coloring them. And that helped a lot. Talking about wires, as I said, there's tons of them. I actually ran it so the infrared receivers for the remote control are up in the head. And that was because I wanted to make sure that everything would function, wouldn't be buried behind other parts, and so I could get to it. And it would actually receive the signal from the remote. And so there are a lot of long cords here. And if you've played with MINDSTORMS, you'll note that it comes with like the most rinky-dinky little cords you've ever seen. I don't know why that is. They're like a few inches long. And so I actually found this site, mindsensors.com, and it was fantastic. They came quickly. They have tons of different lengths for the cords, up to like several meters. So totally loved that that was available. It's an option for me. Because the box is at the bottom and the sensor's up here, you're never going to get there. So that's most of it. Okay. So a couple of lessons learned in the middle. So as I mentioned, I used to have a motor in the neck, and it just didn't have enough torque. Once the head got heavy, it couldn't turn against the weight. And so I had to rip that out, redo the neck, and put in a large motor down here on the shoulders. And I ran a shaft up through here to run to the head. And that actually works great. Another thing I found, and this is something that, being relatively new to these bigger creations, I found that all the weight was actually pushing out these bars. And so it would sag and they'd pop off to the sides, and the gear would just come out of the shaft here. And so just had to put some reinforcing bars across. So little lessons learned like that as you go forward, and you learn and you fix it and you move on. And that's most of it. So that's pretty much the robot finished. And as you can see, basically I covered up a lot of the areas with system bricks, so it looked pretty, but I wanted to make sure there were still gaps. You could see gears, you could see the motors a little bit, so it looks cool and like a real industrial robot. And the last thing I put in was this distance sensor, and I wanted to have some functionality with that as well. Okay, so just a couple points on sort of what I did when the build was done, programming and editing pictures and things, and then we'll dive into the demo. Okay, so MINDSTORMS, I'm still the total noob with this, so you'll laugh. I mean, this is the whole program here. It's pretty simple, nothing crazy, but I got it to work. So the head would swivel, eyebrows would raise and lower, shoulder gun raises. You can play audio files, which I totally did not rip off from the movie. It has color recognition and the distance sensor, and you can do actions based on those. So other things you have to do when you're done, or you don't have to do this, but I like to post my creations online. And so what is that editing process like? So you start with a picture, and you can do it all sorts of ways, but I like to do it with pretty bland background. That makes it a lot cleaner. And in this case, I wanted one of my versions to have a poster in the background. So I actually put a real poster board there, so it'd give like realistic shadows for me. And then I chopped that out, made it transparent, and I was able to add all this goofy, silly stuff for an online game I was playing. But you can do it simpler too. You can just cut out all the background except for maybe the shadow, and then plop that on white. Use a finishing program like CorelDRAW to put in graphics. And sometimes, it depends on the build, but I'll make a video. And of course, this time, since there's motion and sound and all that, I thought it'd be fun to make a video. So I use a program called Pinnacle Studio 20. It's a fantastic program to do everything I need to do anyway. Pretty easy to use. All right, we'll end with these stats, and then we'll hop into the fun stuff. So how long did it take me? It took about a month. That was this year during COVID, so I had plenty of time. But of course, I'm working at the same time, so it wasn't all day every day. I really have no idea how much it weighs. I want to say 10 to 20 pounds. I'll have to get it on a scale at some point. It's over 2 feet tall, so it's actually pretty big, like I said. It's got a bunch of motors built in. And I want to talk about the success of the functionality or lack thereof. So the tank drive is just abysmal. It just does not work. It just kind of stutters around and shakes. And so that's one of the things I think that making things a lot more rigid and planning a little better in the Technic frame will help. The arms work great. The head swivels and all the other MINDSTORMS functions seem to work well. All right, I just wanted to mention, I made him a little friend too, and you'll see that today as well, but I had to do it. It was just a few inches tall, it was a quick one. Not much to talk about this guy. There was only one technique that I thought was worth mentioning, and it's just using clips and bars, and so lightsaber handles with dishes to have the tread hold its shape. So that was that. Okay, so I promised fun stuff. Let's dive into the fun stuff. So as you can see, early on, even when you make some mistakes, it doesn't compound yet, so things work well when it's light and small, but it starts to have some troubles as you get bigger. It was so fun watching this come together, though.
Okay, adding sound this time.
So this was some of the early testing with power function, or sorry, MINDSTORMS. There's some of his trash talk and his laser going. And the early work on the eyebrows. So here, I'm going to stop it here because I'm going to show you live the rest of it. But that's just sort of a look at how things were coming together. Cool. Let's do a quick MINDSTORMS demo. See if this works. Hopefully everything functions as I hope. But all right, you need some input. Start with some red. Oh, you didn't like that. Oh, come on, Johnny 5, you didn't like that? Well, we'll just have to do something else. We will rub his belly to make him feel better. That is incredibly rude, Johnny 5. Also, you didn't recognize the right color, jerk, so it's okay. He was supposed to have his laser come up, but that's what happens when you play with this stuff live. The color sensor I've found is very finicky, so keep that in mind if you're playing with stuff. And then the distance sensor, I had to reach close to it because when it's built in kind of in a pocket like that, it actually turns out that it has difficulty reading things further away. So more lessons learned for later.
So question 1, do you have any suggestions for someone who wants to start up in LEGO Power Functions?
Yes, I would suggest starting with some really basic kits. So maybe you can get one of these smaller Technic kits, and then you have some of the basic parts. You have the axles, the wheels, gears and things, and then buy just a couple of motors and a receiver and a remote, and just start diving in. And sometimes you can buy the whole package in one set. Like I recommended a set to a friend the other day. It was like a racer. You know, it came with a couple of motors, it came with the receiver, it came with the remote, and it was a really reasonable price. It was like $40 or something like that, or $60. And you kind of get the whole package to play with, and that's when you can start doing your own kind of modifications and play with things. But I would say get a small kit like that and start it off.
All right. Next question, how did you tuck away the wires so effectively on the mock?
Well, basically, it's kind of a Technic core, and so there's usually a lot of space in parts of the frame. So you can see things like, hey, look, there's wires kind of hidden behind stuff. And you just kind of run them in and around the frame. Makes sense, but it's nice that Technic isn't a solid core, right? And so there's all this room here to run wiring. That's pretty much how it goes throughout most of the build. There are some choke points, like you can see the back here on the neck. You just have to run the wires up to the back of the head. There's not much you can do there to hide things completely, but you know, keep it neat and it doesn't really distract you a lot too much.
Next question. Do you have any videos of your Johnny 5 posted online, YouTube, Twitch, other media sources like that?
Yes, yeah. I am on YouTube and I'm also on Flickr. I think I come across as the Duggo on Flickr. And YouTube, it might just be Douglas Hughes, I'm not sure. But you could probably do a YouTube Lego Johnny 5 search and you'd probably find it. Or Flickr Lego Johnny 5 and you'd probably get there.
Hey, Doug, is there any way you could show us a little more movement? Maybe the arms and the head, neck?
Yeah, I'm gonna do that. So there's his arms. And that's remote control. I don't know, he's yelling at us or something. It's Italian. All right, so I can't drive him, like I said, because it's a little too floppy right now. But the head, let's see, I could probably just play through the program one more time. Bear with me. And I'll zoom in real close on his head when I do that. Hey, Jess. All right. This is always hard to do last second. There we go. That works that time. Oh, I didn't like that. Oh boy. Never heard that noise before.
He's a little angry today.
Yeah. Cool. Let's see, any other questions?
Yeah, how did you get interested in Lego?
I think like a lot of people, I started as a kid. I think my parents just saw, an educational building toy. Hey, there's no violence in here. Cool, let's get them these. And then just like most kids, I just got hooked super fast. So built a lot as a kid. And, I had years during high school and college especially where things slowed down a little bit. But once I moved out to Seattle, I eventually got my collection out here and kind of got things rolling again.
Great. How long did it...
We have about 3 minutes left, so let's try to squeeze in a couple more questions.
Okay.
How long did it take you to make the mini robot, Doug?
Yeah. That was just a couple of hours, one afternoon. Just kind of sped through it. It's a lot of fun though.
Super.
It's pretty teeny, so not too bad.
One of the things I was wondering about your build, when as a fellow builder, when it comes to like a gunmetal gray, you can kind of go light gray or dark gray when you're doing your mock, when you're doing your build. Was there a reason you went with light gray? Was it aesthetic or was it about part availability? What led you down that road?
Great question. A little bit of both. Obviously, you want to try and be true to the source material, and so it was going to be gray of some kind. And then, yeah, parts availability for sure for the vast majority of components. Building a lot of castle stuff in the past, I've got a good amount of light bluish gray, so that worked out well. And then it's nice to have the accent color for the other gray, like you said. For the industrial look, either one can work, and so having the other one available as accent is nice. And I also thought it was good that it set apart the trade color from the main color. I think that would have looked a little weird if they were the same.
Do you have any tips for lining up or spacing brick levels between Technic and non-Technic?
Yeah, I think basically continue using the general rule of, if you've got snot bricks, the sideways bricks, you've got the one stud on the side of there, then you stack 2 plates below or above and put another snot brick, that equals stud, space, stud, and then use that same spacing within Technic beams. So like any Technic beam, these are just regular stud spacing, right? So you can attach bricks to those using the ratio I just talked about. You can also have things pop on and off, like these Technic plates that have a pin in the back. And they will get you into and out of Technic and system. There's also, I have it visibly, I've got one here, a half pin. So these little half pins, you stick them in Technic holes, and they have pretty good clutch power. So if you get a few of them, you can usually get some good attachment there. So you can put a few of those in a line, and you can attach some system stuff.
Doug, this has been a wonderful presentation, and we thank you so much for sharing everything with us.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you coming by.